Hi, this is Kamisha with Sister Afia back with another video about mental wellness. In this video, I'll be talking about generational trauma and ongoing trauma within the Black community, but specifically for Black women. And so, one of the scholars that I really admire is Dr. Joy DeGruy. She's a social work researcher, and her scholarship is on post-traumatic slave disorder, and I'll include some more information about that in the description box. But her scholarship really touches on the generational trauma that's happened throughout history to Black people and how we've never gotten a break to really recognize the trauma and to heal from it so that we don't pass it on to future generations. And so I would really encourage people to really look up her work. But her work kind of intersects with some of the work that I do as a social worker in the field, working in violence prevention and intervention in Chicago. And so a lot of the behaviors and the things that I see with the youth and the families and the communities that I serve are symptoms of what would be considered post-traumatic stress disorder. But unfortunately, I would say it's ongoing traumatic stress disorder because most of the people that I encounter aren't able to leave their environment. So they're constantly, what's different is if you, for example, go away to war and you're in the combat zone and you leave, you leave the environment that brought you the stress, that brought you the trauma, most likely, and you come back to an environment that's not like that. But for Black people, we don't get to leave the environment most of the time. We have to stay there, and so the impact of that is on a scale that can't be measured because you're not able to leave the stressor, you're not able to leave the environment that is triggering you, that is a part of reliving the very hurtful or harmful experiences that have happened to you and also the ones that you love in the process. And so I think that to heal, to begin the conversation about healing, the first thing that I think is important is acknowledging I've been traumatized, or acknowledge that I'm living, in communities, or I'm living in a home that's violent. And first acknowledging that, I think, is the first step to being able to heal and to seek help. And the next thing I think is important is finding that supportive network. Who are the people that you can rely on, who can support you through your healing? Oftentimes, when people are experiencing symptoms of PTSD, and I'll go through some of those symptoms really briefly, but oftentimes they're suffering in silence. Nobody really knows everything that they're dealing with, and so building that support network so that you can heal is really another thing that can help you to get closer to where you want to be as a person and how you want to live as a person, even though you've experienced these really hard things. So I'll take a break of going over some things that can help you to heal, just to go over some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. One of the things is re-experiencing the event. So reliving it through memories, dreams, flashbacks. That's probably the number one thing that happens to most people. Another one is avoidance. So when the thoughts and when the people and places that come to mind that remind you of the event, yet you try to avoid those things. The other thing are negative changes in your mood, thoughts, and isolation. So just briefly before, I talked about how isolating can be really harmful, and it can actually make the symptoms worse. And so having really negative beliefs or thoughts, feeling guilty or feeling fear or feeling anger, or just isolating yourself from activities and other people to just deal with the experiences that you have as relates to trauma. And then lastly, having irritable and reckless behavior, and this is one that I see a lot, is, the angry outburst, the self-destructive behavior, being hypervigilant. So that means like being overly watchful and attentive to others in your environment. So that's probably the one. I would say re-experiencing the event and irritable and reckless behavior is what I see most with Black folks who are dealing with ongoing trauma and stress. And yeah, so I just wanted to go over that so people know what it is and what it looks like, because you hear the word PTSD and people are like, well, what is that? They think of war, but they don't. But these are things that can happen in everyday life. It could be a natural disaster. It could be someone getting shot. It could be being a survivor of domestic violence or sexual assault. It could be so many. It could be a car accident. You know, it could be so many different things. But specifically with post-traumatic stress disorder, it is usually linked to one traumatic experience or a couple of traumatic experiences, and how that traumatic experiences affects how you're able to move and shake and function within the world. And I want to go back to ways to heal or steps to heal. And I'll also say that there's no one size fit all approach. So I can't be like, hey, this is what's going to work for you. And so I'm speaking more in general terms about what can be helpful if you're experiencing ongoing trauma and violence, and also if you are dealing with generational trauma. I think another thing that's key to know is what has happened to people in your past, or what has happened in the past to people who you care about. So what has happened to your family, really just digging deep to the things that have happened to them and how some of that might be linked to what's happening to you. So doing that own personal family research or even community research can help you to better understand what's happening to you as it relates to ongoing trauma and generational trauma. And I will also say that seeking resources and seeking help, and it doesn't necessarily mean going to a therapist. It could be going to a support group. It could be doing art making activities. It could be writing. It could be, you know, it could be going for, long walks or exercising. There are many ways that you can begin to heal, and that's why I say it's not a one size fits all approach. It really depends on where you're at and where you are with your healing process. So that is a lot of information to squeeze in such a short bit of time, but I just wanted to begin to touch on the generational trauma and also the ongoing trauma that happens, and how it's like this big monster that's really hard to defeat. But there are little steps that we can take every single day to help us to begin to heal, even when we're in an environment where we can't remove ourselves. So I'll say that again. Black people have rarely had the opportunity to heal, to take a break and remove ourselves from the environment that's oppressing us. And so finding the ways that best suit you to heal, it can bring you closer to not stopping the generational trauma, but passing down the trauma that's happened to you to other people who are in your lineage, who are in your family. So for myself, in my family, I don't think there's really anything that I can think of that's a part of generational trauma that I feel like has been passed down to me. I think one of the things that really stick out to me is my great 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 grandfather. He was enslaved, and my grandmother actually having the primary document that showed me that it was in the census that he was a piece of property, and that sticks with me a lot because of what that means. And it's not. I don't know what trauma he experienced, but just knowing that he wasn't even considered human does impact me a lot. And I think about that a lot of times in my conversations that I have with other people about the enslavement of Black people. And I'm like, yo, I seen a document that said that my great-great-grandfather was not a human at all. He was property. And how that impacts how I look at the world and how I see the world, and how And it's not necessarily like the worst thing, but it impacts me more than I think I realize on the conscious level. It's something that impacts me unconsciously sometimes. So that's just like a little example, but in my family, fortunately, there hasn't been trauma that I really, really know about that's serious. So I feel fortunate in that aspect, but I know there's people who've experienced molestation in their family, who've experienced, you know, lynching in their family. They've experienced police brutality, um, barring from, basic resources. So all of those things people experience, and those things are what we carry with us in our day-to-day lives. So I hope that this video provided you with some insight or some information as it relates to generational trauma and ongoing trauma. And I hope that if you are experiencing these things, that you take steps to heal. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email us at info@sisterafia.com. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and be well.